What is up guys, it's your boy Swell. I'm here back with another Classic WoW video for Season of Discovery. Now today we're talking about Phase 4 once again, and we are going to be reacting to No Hit Jerome's brand new video talking about utility and class balance issues. Now I'm not going to waste any time here, we're just going to get right into the video, and I'll be leaving my thoughts about this down there as well. Now I've played quite a few classes, both in Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3, and now I'm probably going to play quite a few in Phase 4 as well, we'll see. But class balancing has always been a problem, and I'm interested to see what he has to say about this. Let's just check out the video. So I'm going to pop this one out in full screen, and I'll be leaving a like, or I'll be leaving a like, but I will also be leaving the link down below so you can check it out as well. So go and show some support to No Hit Jerome. But either way, let's take a look at the video. So here we go.
Yo everybody, welcome back to the channel where we dive deep into the world of Warcraft. Today we're discussing some exciting updates and insights from the Season of Discovery developer Josh Greenfield, also known as Agrend. We're also going to be discussing the current state of balance on the PTR and my own personal experience. We'll be breaking down the recent tweets from senior game producer Josh Greenfield regarding the balance of the game and the test realm itself. And we'll also be discussing the community reaction, including opinions from notable players like Joker D. And of course we're going to include my own personal thoughts and my experience on the test realm as well. So starting things off, right before the PTR went live this week, senior dev Josh, he tweeted about the upcoming changes to the Hunter, the Mage, the Warlock classes. So the idea is that these classes are going to be tested first, and then more changes for other classes are going to be rolled out later. The thing is though, with this July 11th release, it does kind of feel like we're running out of time for new balancing, so this might be kind of what you see is what you get. So Josh also emphasized that the main focus is on the gameplay mechanics, rather than the final damage numbers. He really dropped a bombshell by saying that perfect numbers aren't the goal, it's more about the outliers in the top and the bottom. But Josh didn't stop there, because he also put out a truly staggering amount of insight regarding the design philosophy of the team heading into Phase 4. It is really clear.
What is this? To further manage expectations, we don't expect the damage numbers to be in their final state for really any class yet. We are trying to focus on gameplay first, and then we'll pull the levers on the numbers after things. I don't know what's great
from
out there.
All the tweets that Agrend made, that they're focusing on how every class feels first before they worry about the final damage numbers. Reading between the lines, you can see that Agrend is really talking about addressing classes like the Warriors, the Enhanced Shamans, and making sure they're not a huge outlier going into Phase 4. So after the initial dev tweets, I really wanted to tweet Josh about their philosophy of utility versus damage. Because the thing about 2004 Classic is, yes, the Warriors did all the damage, but the idea was that was kind of okay, because they didn't bring that much utility to the table. The problem now is that Blizzard wants to upset the...
Please tell me, here's the thing, something that has stirred me the wrong way, is that I don't like that. One class being top DPS all the time, because, oh, that's all we bring, DPS baby. It's just Season of discovering that Warriors are still top DPS. It's still the same. Season of discovering that Warriors are still top DPS, Season of discovering that melee classes scale better with the gear, like they scale better with stats, they get more crit, where the world buffs are surrounded, like they get so much from the world buffs as well, both in terms of attack power, crit, hit, everything. Melee just benefits so much, and then they benefit from the gear they get better, they just scale better, and even in an early raid as well, they can start out being bad, and by the end they are good. And when it comes to Classic WoW, people care about numbers. You just can't deny that anymore. People love numbers. We're parsing. Parsing culture exists for a reason. People try to top DPS for a reason. People get all the world buffs they can, all the consumes they can, for a reason. They're trying to get that number to go up. And then one class always having the biggest numbers, it just makes one thing happen. Everyone plays the same class, or they want to play the same class. At the moment, if you're speedrunning right now, what we're seeing is people are stacking melee. Once again, who would have thought? Season of Discovering, warriors are still top DPS, it's melee meta once again. Boom! I'm so surprised. Meanwhile, I came in here hoping that mages were going to be top DPS. Well, to be honest, we're quite fine. And I was hoping that warlocks would have a chance to be top DPS, shadow priests could be top DPS, boomkins could be top DPS for once. When has that happened? Never. When is it going to happen? According to Blizzard, never.
Cabbage cart. They want to nerf warriors and then bring up support classes to make them more viable. But I wanted to really know how far Blizzard was willing to go. Would they be okay with, say, Shadow Priests and Warlocks at #1 DPS, and Warriors are...
And another thing is that now they are making everyone bring more utility anyway. Hunters are top DPS, or they have been in the past, and they bring utility. They bring the utility of True Shot aura, they bring aspect of the lion, like those stats, they bring huge stat buffs, and they have pets. Hunters are one of the most utility-heavy classes in the game, and they're still top DPS. I feel like Blizzard is just talking against themselves quite often, where they're saying, our philosophy is that if you're top DPS, you should not have that much utility. And if you are top utility, you should not have that much DPS. Like, that's what they said in that tweet, right? The more utility you have, the less DPS it's okay to do, and the less DPS you technically, theoretically should do. Meanwhile, Hunters, one of the most utility-heavy classes in the game, also have been top DPS in the game. Hunters have been able to use their pets, and using Beast Mastery rune, or even without as well, to use their pets for a taunt, like if you have a tank swap mechanic, or just a mechanic where you have to take the boss of the tank for a little bit, you can have a hunter do that. In Molten Core, hunters can kite certain mobs or kite certain bosses around, like, and you have Trank Shot coming as well. They can Trank to remove buffs and to remove Berserk. They can kite mobs, they can kite bosses. They have a pet Taunt to taunt mobs off the boss. And they bring range attack power buff, melee attack power buff, and now they bring the 10% stats as well to the raid. Like, they bring some of the most heavy utility imaginable. Meanwhile, Boomkins bring Boomkin Aura for a little bit more spell power, and they bring Innervate, and because they have so much utility, and I say this like very sarcastically, so much utility, they have to be bottom DPS. Like, having Innervate and Boomkin form, it's insane, bruh. Meanwhile, Hunters, the most utility insane class, and also top DPS. Or have been so far. Like, have definitely been up there for quite a while.
Rogues being at the bottom because they don't bring very much utility. So in a bomb...
Season of Discovery for me has been Season of Discovering that melee is still the way to go, and if you're playing a caster, you're playing the game wrong. Speedrunning guilds as well. Here's what they have. 3 healers, sometimes 2, but let's just say 3. 3 healers, 2 casters, preferably mages for AoE on trash fights, and 3 melee groups. 15 melees. 15 melee, 2 or 3 casters, and 2 or 3 healers. Oi oi oi.
Shell tweet. Gren really unleashed the design philosophy of Blizzard going into Phase 4 for utility, for damage. How they think about these different factors.
Oh.
See, actually, okay. Josh did admit that they do...
No. You're not going to just skip through that one quickly, dude.
How they think about these different factors.
Okay. This is why we talk about not looking for perfect balance, because to us, balance is about more than pure output, and it's at times very situational. We will not make everyone happy, and there are some people that want something we can't or won't deliver for whatever reason. We just try and do what we can that makes sense at a time. Sometimes we make mistakes while we're at it too. We are just trying really hard with Phase 4 to start in a good place with how classes play mechanically. That's the most important thing to us right now, and we'll worry about the numbers after that. It won't be perfect with how fast we are moving, but already feel better going in this phase than we felt going into the last phase. Okay.
See, actually, Josh did admit that they do factor in utility when determining how much damage a class should do. So if you're looking at the PTR right now and you're wondering why are rogues at the top of the meters, it's kind of explained by Blizzard's philosophy. Grend also mentioned that.
Okay, but then why have Hunters been top DPS so far? Phase 1, Hunters were really good. They could even... A Hunter pet could be a tank, by the way. Meanwhile, the Hunter was almost topping DPS. Phase 2, Hunter was pretty good. Phase 3, anyone remember melee Hunters? anyone play Melee Hunter in Phase 3, it's been quite good. And the utility they bring as well, like personal stats, personal attack power, stats for the raid, attack power for the raid, or for the group at least. And they still bring the pet that can also taunt and taunt swap, if need be, which pretty much is never, but if need be, you can be there to do that. And you can even use a personal shot as well to get threat to you, and then feign death. The utility they have is insane. They can slow down mobs from freezing traps as well. They can CC from frost trap. Need I go on? Meanwhile being top DPS. So if they take in utility for how much damage you should do, have they looked at hunters even once? Because for me, I just feel like they're looking at casters. The more utility casters bring, the less DPS they should do. But if you're a melee or a non-caster, they want you to be top DPS all the time.
Blizzard wouldn't just take down a utility class if they were near the top of the meters. They would have to be a really big outlier. So the idea would be that even if a Shadow Priest brings huge utility with Vampiric Touch, huge party healing with Vampiric Embrace, that would still be okay as long as they weren't a huge outlier on the meters.
Yeah, makes sense.
The same idea would apply to, say, a Feral Druid or a Ret Paladin. If they're number 1 on the meters, Blizzard might take a look. But if they're number 3, that's not really a big problem. So after Josh's initial tweet, there was really a frenzy of responses about Blizzard's balancing philosophy with this utility versus damage dilemma. So one of the Shadow Priests I talked to a lot, Momo, he brought up this idea of having different runes, so you could balance, say, having more utility versus having more damage. On paper, that makes a lot of sense. If you're doing progression rating, you bring more utility. Once you're in the farm stages, say a Shadow Priest could bring more damage. Josh, though, had a really good response that, while it's a great idea on paper, due to the modern performance measuring of, say, sites like Warcraft logs, it really just couldn't work. Players in some...
What did he... Okay, let me look at the reply here. Exactly what he said.
Josh, though, had a really good response that, while it's a great idea on paper, due to the modern performance...
The logging site isn't likely going to make a segment for team player priest. There's only going to be DPS priest. It took years to finally see power infusion separated out in logs. Yeah, but this wouldn't really be a problem, because this would allow people, like let's just say you have a raid team where you are lacking heals, but you have Shadow Priest. They can then, let's just say you put on a rune that makes it so Shadow Priest, 30% of all spell power you deal, or let's just say 20%, 30%, something like that. 25% of all damage you deal is converted to healing instead onto random nearby friendly targets. And that rune would take up a significant DPS rune instead, so like put it on, I don't know, Mind Spike, Mind Flay, anything that is important for Shadow Priest, but they could put this on to lower their DPS, or let's just say the rune itself is on a completely separate thing. It's a trinket rune. 25% of the damage you deal is converted to healing on friendly targets, but you also deal 25% less damage. Or something like that. That way, that priest would now be a combination between a healer priest and a shadow priest, if your guild needs that, then and there. And when you're in the farm stage, or you're like at the stage where you want to improve your parse, that priest can take off that rune and improve his parse. It just gives them flexibility of swapping to be a semi-healer or like a flex priest, or being a DPS priest. I don't know why this would be a problem. I really don't. And even for logging, it shouldn't be a problem.
Performance measuring of, say, sites like Warcraft logs, it really just couldn't work. Players in some guilds would be forced to go the utility options, while players in other guilds would be allowed to go the damage options. The result would be resentment and toxicity. Some players would look worse even though they're actually bringing more to the table. Meanwhile, John James pointed out that as a melee hunter, being asked to bring True Shot Aura, or sub...
But it's like, we had this, like, my guild had this in Phase 2, where we brought a couple of boomkins that it was basically a restoration druid with boomkin. and they got very bad parses because you swapped out, I think it was Sunfire for something else. You swapped out whatever gave you wild growth, so they were boomkins with wild growth. It took down their DPS by between 5 and 10%, but it gave them a massive heal in phase 2, which was really helpful to our progression raids, and when we had the raid down to farm, we then let them go Sunfire instead, and at that point, they could then simply increase their parse. But when needed, they could put on wild growth, and it wasn't really a problem when it came to logging in phase 2, was it? Sure, if you had to put on wild growth for a raid, that specific raid, your parses would be, let's just call it bricked, but you could then get better parses next raid, when your guild has better loot and you kill the bosses easier, or you've done the mechanics and you learn the fight.
It was really hurting his DPS. Josh actually responded by saying that they finally have the technology to balance individual talents inside, and he followed that up with patch notes a few days later that True Shot Aura no longer grants melee attack power, and that's given by Heart of the Lion. So it is really cool to see that Blizzard's able to do some individual talent balancing to try to fix some of these problems. That relates very well to Joker D's comment. He joined in on the conversation and brought up a really interesting point. The idea would be to reduce the healing from Vampiric Embrace, so perhaps a 50% reduction to other party members. That way Blizzard could easily balance and lower the utility of Shadow Priest, while still keeping the class identity and allowing them to do more damage. As the True Shot Aura change confirms, Blizzard could definitely do this now, so I'd be curious in the comments if you guys think that would be a good idea. So after all these dev tweets, there were more than a few players really happy to see Blizzard's new philosophy. Smivy, who I'm always running into on the PTR, was really happy to see the dev mindset heading into phase 4. Meanwhile, Jacob, he liked that the utility would be a major factor in raids going forward, optimistic that unlike in 2019, raids wouldn't have to end up with the same classes all the time. On the negative side, though, Franz didn't like...
I'm just gonna say it now, and I might be pessimistic here, but give it 2 months and tell me if I'm wrong. The Molten core setups in Season of Discovery is going to be very similar to the Molten core setups we had in Classic WoW when it comes to speedrunning or just raiding or like what people want when it comes to parsing as well. It's going to be very similar, and for most groups you will probably have 2 melee groups, 1 caster group and 1 healer group, but for the top guilds they will have 3 melee groups and 1 combination group, and that combination group is probably going to be 2 casters, 3 healers, and then the 3 melees are going to be, well, 15 melee. You will see a bunch of warriors there, a bunch of rogues, 3 feral druids, 1 per group, right, for Wind Fury. Maybe less on the horde side because you have shamans, right, and a couple of paladins. Ret paladins are doing really well right now on PTR, so it's going to be really melee heavy once again. The only differences we're going to see, really, is that we will have less ranged hunters in Classic Season of Discovery than we had in Classic WoW, because a bunch of them will go melee instead, and a couple of the warriors might go rogue instead, simply because rogue is more viable. So you're swapping out 1 melee for another melee, and 1 physical DPS for another physical DPS, and you will probably have less casters than we used to, and less healers than we used to. But for the most part, warriors on top baby, rogues on top baby, and melee hunters as well, because it's melee. And it's Season of discovering that melees are still overpowered.
That Blizzard factors in performance on sites like Warcraft logs. Since that data could be misleading, it wouldn't be a great way to balance. Then players like Elidius were concerned about perceived utility. It's unfair to weaken a class because of just perception. At least in Phase 3, before Shadow Priest got Vampiric Touch, and they gave everybody infinite mana, Shadow Priest really didn't bring that much utility to the table. Meanwhile, you could make an argument that a mage brings huge utility, but the perception is that they don't bring any utility, so it's okay if they're number 1 on the meter in every fight. There were also more than a few complaints about the balancing of individual classes, and even some accusations of favoritism. After all, Shamans brought some of the highest raid utility, and if you've done any Blood Moons lately, they also got to carry in PvP. Really, more than any other response to Blizzard's tweets, we got a huge amount of complaints about Shamans. Windatar brought up how Shamans were practically a hero class in Phase 3, which immediately makes me think of early Phase Death Knights and just how broken they were. Edgar also brought up how the rules of balance feel like they only apply to classes like Shadow Priests, and classes like Shamans are just completely ignored. And Arthalian brought up how it blows his mind that Shamans haven't been nerfed yet. So I wanted to test if Blizzard's philosophy was really being implemented into Phase 4, or if it was just a bunch of well-intentioned words. I opened up the PTR and I did a bunch of fights on test work. The first thing I wanted to see was whether warriors were really being taken down as much as people thought, and whether support classes were being brought up. Immediately when I started testing, it was clear that rogues and mages were dominating on every single poll. But the big takeaway from my testing was that Blizzard did keep their word on warriors. There was never a poll where I saw a top 5 warrior, and they were almost always at the bottom of the meters. As for whether that's fair when their peers are doing 30% more damage with less effort in their rotations, that's for you to decide in the comments. In the end, utility classes, like they always do, are gonna struggle in Phase 4. And pure DPS classes, with the exception of possibly Warrior, they're going to dominate the meters. So with all these new dev tweets, the philosophy of the endgame of Season of Discovery has finally been revealed. But other than Warriors bottoming out on the meters, this philosophy doesn't feel fully implemented. Most supports are near the bottom, and questions remain about how much of a role they'll play in the endgame. They didn't want us to stack Warriors in Phase 4, but now we might just be stacking Rogues instead. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all the dev tweets and the balancing of Phase 4 so far. And make sure to keep it right here and subscribe for way more balancing insights in the very near future. Then click on my Phase 4 prep video next to make sure you're as prepared as possible for July 11th.
Okay, there we go. Good video, and I just want to chime in by saying that I feel like they are approaching this completely wrong, but I also feel like I might get a lot of backlash from that because a lot of people love that warriors are supposed to be top DPS because they bring less utility, and that boomkins are supposed to be bottom DPS because they bring more utility. Now for me, I don't feel that way because boomkins, sure, they bring some utility, but it's not super duper insane. You have a combat res, really good. You have innervate, and then you have the boomkin aura. That is also really good. On top of that, you can root out in the open world, stuff like that, right? But a lot of classes brings different utility. A lot of classes do bring different utility. I don't know if you count buffs as utility, like I've been doing here, then like individual buffs or stuff like that. Paladins utility due to all the stuff they have, blessings, right? But hunters having aspect of the lion, also having true shot aura. On top of that, they also have freezing traps, frost traps, kiting. They have a personal taunt from the one shot they have where they can taunt a target, and they have a pet taunt on top of that to juggle threat back and forth. They have a bunch of utility. Feign death to reduce aggro, or like to literally remove aggro in general as well. On top of that, they can increase their own movement speed. They can slow down mobs from concussive shot or frozen traps. They have both personal movement speed, raid-wide movement speed, group-wide movement speed. There's so many things they have when it comes to utility. Warriors as well can suddenly swap from being a DPS to being an off-tank. If you suddenly need an off-tank for, let's say, 10-15 seconds, they can swap on a sword and board mid-combat and go defensive stance and act as a tank for 15 seconds. And in Phase 4, they get the Dragon Slayer Light buff. That is the biggest utility ever. If your group wipes or you die, you can buff yourself with a Dragon Slayer buff that is not the same, but it's Dragon Slayer Light, which I've talked about in a previous video. So they're also getting utility next phase as well. And what I wanted to bring up here is that I feel like if your class brings utility, that's fine. But you shouldn't be looked at as you need to be 70% of a DPS class. I want it to be way closer than what it currently is. Let's say top DPS is 100%. At the moment, utility classes are between 70 and 80%. I want them to be 95%. Like, it has to be super close when it comes to how good they are in DPS. And the utility might make up for the last 5%, but the thing is, for us as a guild, we've been raiding since Phase 1. In Phase 1, we did 7 raids per week. Phase 2, we did less. Phase 3, even less, right? Because we just, less people leveled, we lost people every single phase, and in Phase 1 it was just very fast to both level and do the raid. Either way, what I'm trying to say is that we have been doing a bunch of raids for a long time, and we have gone through 7 boomkins. Because none of them stay. all of them either quit, swap classes, or quit or swap classes. We have had 4 Boomkins swap mains because Boomkins, they just didn't do enough damage. They got all of their best in slaughter gear, and they still did like 60% of the DPS of a mage. And you just feel like you're a bot being there to buff other people, which feels shit. If your only job is buffing other people, it makes you want to be one of those other people. Parse culture exists for a reason, and people would rather play the top DPS class than be a buffing bot. It is just that simple. Either way, I don't like what they're doing, and I wanted to say that. But a good video from Jerome. A good video and a good summary. And I love the editing style. The editing style of his videos is going like, your editing is insane. I don't know if you're watching my reaction to this, but if you are, I just want to say your editing has been through the roof and getting better every single video. I just wanted to put that out there. Even though you're probably not watching 26 minutes into this reaction video, this one turned out to be a long one. An 8-minute video into a 26-minute reaction. I'm going to shut up now. Thank you all for watching, I really do appreciate it. I will see you again in the next video very soon.